He was rebuilding his life after it was washed away.
Hurricane Harvey had such a devastating impact.
He lost his home. Still, he says, okay, this is the hand I was dealt. I'm going to keep going.
Even though it wasn't always easy.
He was suffering with mental illness and addiction.
He started going back to his doctor, and things got better.
Until weeks of silence led to a terrible discovery.
You in there?
He notices there's a smell.
I'm trying to find my brother.
What they find is a decomposing body.
Had struggles from his past snuck back in?
He's already dealing with a lot.
Could he have turned to drugs to drown his sorrows and accidentally overdosed?
Or is there more to this story?
They became closer friends, and eventually they had a sexual relationship.
She seemed a little bit jealous.
She was a compulsive liar.
She said, let me tell you something. I was like, what?
Theories are running wild at this point.
I thought she was playing.
What has happened here?
January 20th, 2018. It's Saturday evening in Houston, Texas, a sprawling coastal city of more than 2 million, struggling to recover from the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey.
Hurricane Harvey more than devastated the city of Houston.
You can't really meet someone in Houston that wasn't affected in one way or another by Hurricane Harvey.
The storm's impact is one of the reasons Ethan Brock is on his way to the west side of town to check on his stepbrother, 34-year-old Melvin Maxwell Jr.
Melvin had been living in a hotel since getting displaced by Hurricane Harvey.
It's been a few weeks, and Melvin's family has not heard from him.
Not only was cell service spotty in the hurricane's aftermath, Melvin had also stopped answering his hotel room's landline.
At first it would ring and then sound like somebody took it off the hook. I said, I wonder if he ignored me.
So that's why Ethan went by the hotel to just check on his brother.
There's a do not disturb sign on the door, but his brother ignores it.
Melvin, you in there?
He knocked on the door and nobody came.
Come on, Melvin. Not playing.
That's when Ethan catches the first whiff of real trouble.
His brother smelled something foul.
Instantly, he feels, oh my goodness, what has happened?
Melvin Maxwell Jr. had a tough life right from the start.
Melvin Jr. came into the world fighting. He was premature when he came in. They say he's gravely sick and we don't know if he's going to survive. But he was a fighter.
But he could always rely on the loving support of his family.
I was his biggest cheerleader. I was crazy about him. His mom was crazy about him.
He is my only child. He was definitely a mama's boy. And he was my little guard, you know, my protector.
But it seemed there were always challenges trying to set him back.
He was smaller than most of the kids his age, and he struggled with that for a little while.
He was injured and lost his left eye. At the time, he was 3. And we then started seeing how it impacted his life till he got in school. And so he struggled reading.
But his tenacity helped him overcome any obstacle.
As he got older, he started going into football and weightlifting.
He did a lot of stuff, want to be bigger than what he was at the time.
But the one thing Melvin couldn't outgrow were issues with his mental health.
He had been diagnosed by the psychiatrist as being bipolar, but he was always trying to do good.
He was diagnosed with ADHD and then schizophrenia.
I did a lot of praying to overcome it, but it started coming prevalent when he became an older man.
Bipolar disorder, ADHD, schizophrenia, none of these are mental health disorders that impact your intellect. It's just about how you're able to receive and give out information.
The doctor prescribed their medications. But as he got older, he started having other kind of mental problems.
Eventually, Melvin's prescribed medication evolved into self-medication.
As he got older, I believe he used drugs and different things to lift him up and bring him down.
When someone has mental illness and they have an addiction, it's kind of figuring out, is it a correlation or is it a causation? And it's really hard to determine which one it is. The correlation is, I just want to numb the pain.
He got hooked on smoking weed, then he got hooked on popping pills, and he was constantly trying to stop, but he never could stop.
But despite the challenges Melvin faced, finding a date wasn't one of them.
He was very attractive, so he had a lot of lady friends.
His first kid was born when he was 16 years old.
But it was far from his last.
He ended up with 7 children, 4 boys and 3 girls.
But while fatherhood came easy, finding a lasting relationship didn't.
He was married twice. His first wife, they got a divorce, and then he married his high school sweetheart.
But that relationship also ended in a separation.
But Melvin never turned his back on his children.
He adored all of his kids, and he was involved in each and every one of the lives of his kids.
He wanted to make sure that they had what they need. He was a good dad.
And he was determined to keep it that way.
He was really struggling. But when he started going back to his doctor, things got better.
Once he was regulated on his medication, Melvin was becoming a productive citizen.
It helped Melvin to become who he wanted to be, a better father, a better son, a better brother, just showing up in a different way than how he had been showing up.
Then Hurricane Harvey made landfall in Texas.
Here comes Harvey, one of the most devastating hurricanes Houston has ever experienced. And Melvin loses everything once again.
He lost his home, I lost my home.
Melvin is already dealing with a lot. He's not just someone that has PTSD from the storm.
Despite the setback, Melvin is not fazed.
FEMA gave him a voucher for a hotel.
Which means Melvin could stay at a hotel of his choosing to get back on his feet.
With the voucher, Melvin moved into a hotel on the west side of Houston.
He says, okay, this is the hand I was dealt. I'm going to keep going.
And by the beginning of 2018, things seemed to be going pretty well.
He's still doing what he needs to do. He's still taking his medication.
So things are looking really good for Melvin.
But now his family is growing concerned after weeks of no contact from Melvin.
Melvin, you in there?
You have so many things swirling in your head. Is this person okay?
Come on, man. I'm not playing.
Are they at the hospital? Is he in jail? Did he hurt someone?
And his brother's worry only increases when he notices a foul smell coming from Melvin's hotel room.
It makes him uneasy. He decides to call 911.
I was trying to find my brother. I came over to the hotel where he was at. I went to the room and I knocked, but nobody came to the door.
And you think he's in that room?
I'm hoping he's not.
He needs HPD to come to do a welfare check on his brother.
But when the police arrive, Melvin still doesn't answer.
Police.
So a hotel employee is called and unlocks it for the officer.
Once they open the door, they realize where the smell was coming from.
They find a decomposing body.
In Houston, Texas, 34-year-old Melvin Maxwell Jr. was working hard to get back on his feet after losing everything to Hurricane Harvey.
Natural disasters can have an everlasting impact on people. But then you add on the fact that he was suffering with mental illness and addiction. Those are two tremendous things to try to recover from. And so he was someone who was courageous.
But now Houston police officers have just found a dead body inside the room where Melvin has been living since the hurricane destroyed his home.
The body's so decomposed, they can't immediately identify who it is.
All they know for sure is that the body is a black male.
There's nothing that indicates foul play.
Call it in. I need the coroner to my location.
But just in case, officers notify the homicide unit.
The police also escort Ethan, who is Melvin's brother, out of the room.
He was overcome with emotion. Seeing a body that is unrecognizable is devastating because you just hope that, I think that's my brother, but I'm not really sure.
However, when detectives arrive on the scene, they quickly conclude that the body is likely Melvin's.
The room is rented to Melvin. There are prescription bottles found with Melvin's name on it. There's a wallet found, and his identifying information is still there.
There's also a Social Security card and some credit cards in Melvin's name.
So now they're just trying to figure out what has happened here.
When detectives take a closer look at the body, the level of decomposition makes it difficult to determine what happened to him.
The body's going to have to go to the medical examiner to make the final determination of whether foul play was involved.
Leaving CSI to process the scene, detectives head down to the lobby where Melvin's father and his brother Ethan are waiting.
After the officers escorted him out of the room, Ethan called the family with the news.
I was just devastated. Didn't want to live anymore.
Once Ethan called me and told me that he was dead, I came up to the hotel.
Melvin's father was willing to give the police any information they needed in regards to his son.
Can you tell us when was the last time you had contact with Melvin?
It's been a couple of weeks.
Melvin and his family communicate on a regular basis. They were able to see him during Christmas. They text him during the New Year. Things were going well for Melvin.
The last time that they spoke was on January the 4th.
And then all of a sudden, there's no communication whatsoever.
Initially, the family thought maybe he was having issues with his cell phone.
But they also informed detectives there were times when Melvin would go MIA.
It wasn't unusual for there to be a couple of days where they didn't hear from him.
My son had times in his life where he didn't want to be bothered, so he wouldn't call. And I just assumed he was going through a stage like that.
But then days with no word from Melvin turned into weeks.
They started to become worried, so that's what precipitated the welfare call.
If he has a history of silence, what made you more concerned this time around?
Ethan and Melvin Sr. advised detectives of Melvin's long struggles with mental illness.
The investigators learned that Melvin Jr. had schizophrenia and bipolar. And so, he had his issues that he had to deal with.
On top of that, they tell detectives that Melvin has had to overcome addiction.
Melvin's been going through a lot lately, including losing his house during Harvey.
Maybe Melvin had a manic episode and hurt himself or someone else.
Man, we called to everywhere that we could think of, but no one's seen him.
The family becomes extremely worried.
That's what made me drive up here tonight.
To detectives, it's seeming like Melvin's death isn't the result of a homicide at all.
Did he fall into depression?
Okay, you mentioned that he may have struggled with addiction. Is it possible that he could have overdosed?
Detectives investigating the death of Melvin Maxwell Jr. have learned that the 34-year-old had long been struggling with addiction, as well as his mental health.
Is it possible that he could have overdosed?
So detectives are wondering if Melvin's addiction got the best of him.
Ethan said no, he would never overdose.
No, not Melvin. No way.
It will take an autopsy to determine the cause of death. But in the interim, detectives want to know if Melvin had problems with anyone.
After all, severe mental illness and addiction can have a negative impact on relationships.
The investigators want to know who's closest to Melvin.
Did he have any romantic relationships?
Well, he was divorced from his first wife, and then things fell apart with his second wife.
He had just broke up with my youngest grandson's mother, so they were married but separated.
He had also started a new relationship with a woman in Houston.
He decided on a rebound.
That rebound happens to be an older woman, 44-year-old Shaterika Purvis.
Melvin, is that you?
Oh, man, yeah.
Shaterika was a family friend.
What are you doing here?
I'm visiting my aunt, man. How you been?
Good, good.
He met Shaterika because Shaterika and her mother lived in the same apartment complex as my sister.
Good.
She and Melvin had known each other for some time, but had just reconnected recently.
We should get together sometime.
Okay. Definitely.
Shortly after that, they became closer friends, and eventually they had a sexual relationship.
But it's not just his romantic relationships detectives have to investigate.
Okay, guys, can you think of any other relationships, close friendships that he might have had?
Actually, I believe he was friendly with one of the staff here at the hotel.
She's a security guard. He would come downstairs and he would talk to her sometimes.
All right, guys, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
After wrapping up with Melvin's family, detectives check in with hotel management about this security guard.
They find out her name is Janelle Richards.
But she doesn't work here anymore, though.
Janelle had just resigned prior to the discovery of Melvin's body.
Oh, really?
The timing of her resignation is a little suspicious.
Detectives also want to know if anyone has been in Melvin's room recently.
He actually asked us to stop coming in a while ago.
His do not disturb sign was on the door.
Which means nobody had entered for weeks.
However, they did notice him come down for breakfast a few times during the new year.
But they don't remember him having breakfast past the first few days in January.
Given that the family's last communication with Melvin was on January 4th, and law enforcement discovered his body on January 20th, it creates a wide window of time that Melvin was unaccounted for.
Hindsight said I should have went to that hotel and checked on him once. I wasn't able to get in contact with him for a couple of days. It was terrible for him to sit up in that room all that time.
Back at the station, detectives reach out to Janelle.
Hello? She's more than willing to talk.
She tells them, oh yes, I did strike up a friendship with Melvin.
I knew that he was there with the hurricane. I would see him every time I was at work.
They would speak from time to time when he would come downstairs to get something to eat or come downstairs for coffee.
You know, you see them almost every day. You talk to them, see how their day is. And so you begin to talk about your life.
Detectives want to know if Janelle ever saw Melvin with anyone.
Janelle states that she did see a woman with Melvin from time to time. She was a light-skinned Black woman who appeared to be just a bit older than Melvin.
Never heard her name.
By all accounts, seems like it matches the description of Shaterica. So when officers asked Janelle if she noticed any friction between Melvin and Shaterica, Janelle says no.
Janelle tells them it seems like everything was fine.
But there was one time where she felt like Shaterica was kind of giving her a little attitude.
He didn't introduce us to anything. She just asked who was I, and he said that's the overnight security.
Shaterica seemed to be upset and maybe a little jealous.
Shaterica was a little bit older than Melvin, and she probably felt threatened walking into where he lives, seeing a beautiful security guard standing there that seems familiar with her boyfriend.
See you later. It was good seeing you.
You too.
Thank you.
Now wondering if jealousy could be the motive behind Melvin's death rather than an overdose, detectives turn their attention to Shaterica.
We just tasked with trying to find out what may have happened to him. I'm calling ahead because we'll be out of the office until Friday. But is there a way we can sit you down for about, say, 9:30 on Friday?
Okay, then. I'll see you at 9:30.
Almost a week after discovering Melvin's body, Shaterica arrives for her interview.
Shaterica comes down voluntarily.
Thank you for coming in. Can you tell us about your relationship with Melvin?
And she seems upfront when she sits down with detectives.
She reveals that she and Melvin are in a relationship and that relationship started in November around Thanksgiving.
I hadn't seen him for a long time, but we got together after the hurricane.
Shaterica tells the detectives that she, on occasion, stays with Melvin.
When was the last time you saw him?
It was the night of January 6th.
And there's a reason she remembers the date so clearly.
Shaterica decided to break things off with him that night.
I'm done. I'm done.
Hey, baby. Please don't go.
Shaterica Purvis has just told Houston detectives that Melvin Maxwell Jr. was alive and well when she left him on January 6th, the night she ended their relationship.
Now, detectives want to know what led up to the breakup.
We always had a lot of fun together, but that was a problem.
Her and Melvin were getting high and drunk together.
But then she left because he didn't have no money. She said that he ran out of money, so she left him.
She's frustrated. She tells police that on that night, she waited until about 11 p.m. or so for Melvin to fall asleep. She quietly grabs her things. She goes to the lobby. And she calls her daughter for a ride.
Called my daughter, she picked me up, and that was it.
They continue to question her. Has she heard from Melvin since that night? And she says, no.
She had assumed once he woke up, he would understand because my stuff was not there that I did not want to see him or speak with him.
Okay.
You're free to go.
Thank you.
After talking to Shaterika, detectives make a call to her daughter to confirm her story.
Yes, it's correct. I picked up.
Do you remember what time?
No, I can't tell you what time because I was asleep. And when she called, I just got up.
She doesn't remember the time, but she does remember dropping her mother off at her grandmother's apartment.
She also tells detectives that she never really liked Melvin.
He's very disrespectful, so I talk to him.
Thank you.
After talking to the daughter, detectives feel like Shaterika's statement lines up.
It also matches the time frame given by Melvin's family and the hotel staff.
Had the breakup been one setback too many for Melvin?
Could he have turned to drugs to drown his sorrows and accidentally overdosed?
But an overdose is definitively ruled out when detectives get the autopsy results back from the coroner.
Melvin was stabbed.
The medical examiner found a 4-inch cut on the left side of the chest and a small cut under the right arm.
It wasn't easy for them to figure that out because Melvin's body has been decomposed for a couple of weeks at this point.
Based on this new information, detectives are again faced with a question.
Who could have done this?
With it being a stab wound and him being found in his hotel, it's got to be a crime of passion. So who would have had entrance and had the ability to be inside of that hotel room? And so now attention goes back to the security officer, Miss Janelle.
Maybe she was friendlier with Melvin than she had let on.
Or was it his girlfriend who, according to her statement, was likely the last person to see him alive?
Detectives aren't sure which avenue to pursue until a call comes in.
Out of nowhere, police get a tip from Melvin Sr. that he has spoken to a lady that lives in the complex with them, which Shaterika happens to be residing in.
The woman's name is Lorraine Wilson.
And according to Lorraine, Shaterika had come to her a couple weeks earlier with a shocking confession.
Y'all, I just killed someone.
What?
Investigating the murder of Melvin Maxwell Jr. have just learned that his girlfriend, Shaterika Purvis, may have confessed to the crime.
According to Melvin's father, Shaterika told a neighbor named Lorraine Wilson that she had killed someone.
What?
So police reach out to Lorraine.
Hello?
She tells them she is willing to speak with them.
So apparently you had talked with Mr. Melvin Maxwell Sr.?
Yes, sir.
Lorraine tells them that she doesn't know Shaterika very well, but they would see each other while in the complex. But they also shared a mutual friend who also lived in the complex.
And one night, she happened to run into Shaterika at the mailboxes.
And during this interaction, Shaterika seemed out of sorts.
And she said, I just don't feel like it's not feeling good.
Shaterika says, hey, do you know if Felicia is at home? And she's like, hey, I don't know, but I can walk upstairs with you to check it out.
Felicia was their mutual friend.
So they went to the apartment of Felicia Ramos, where she was with her cousin, Walter Ramos.
She followed behind me, kind of like upset.
When they come inside, Shaterika makes a unusual statement.
She said, let me tell you something. I just killed somebody. I was like, what? She said, I just killed somebody.
She said she got into it with this gentleman and she killed him.
She said, I got a big mismatch instead.
But Lorraine says she and the other two people in the room were skeptical.
I said, we don't look like you would have been to the blood. I wish she was playing.
Shaterica is known to make these wild stories up, so the majority of the people are just, blowing it off like, whatever.
Lorraine says she left shortly after and didn't think about it again.
It's not until she heard that Melvin was murdered at a hotel that causes Lorraine to reach out to Melvin Sr.
Thank you.
After hanging up with Lorraine, detectives immediately reach out to the two other witnesses mentioned in her statement.
Being a part of an investigation, you have to corroborate statements with other statements.
So police reach out to Felicia.
Did you recall her telling any kind of story to you with anyone else in this complex?
I don't believe nothing nobody say.
Felicia basically says nobody pays attention to her. It's like the little boy who cried wolf.
So again, a second person had brushed it off because it seemed so random.
Felicia's cousin, Walter, echoes her sentiment.
It was late at night and we was having us a good time. So this lady came in and said, I just killed somebody. Nobody took it serious.
And so now it's three people that feels she's made up something.
Shaterica's statements seem damning to detectives.
You have people that are sharing what appears to be a confession.
But does that mean she is actually guilty?
Keep in mind, this is a person that's known for not always telling the truth.
Or maybe when she told Melvin she wanted to break up with him, things got out of hand.
So the investigators subpoenaed her phone records.
And when the records come back, investigators' suspicions about Shaterica grow.
It turns out Shaterica did not call her daughter on January 6th, like she initially told police.
What they found out was that on January the 4th, in between 11:30 and midnight, Shaterica made a call to her daughter to come pick her up from the hotel.
This also lines up with the last day that Melvin spoke to his family.
They compare that to Melvin's phone records, and again, they see the last outgoing call was on January the 4th, and then there are a lot of incoming calls, but they went unanswered.
So now detectives are left wondering, did she mix up dates or did she lie on purpose?
Detectives decide they need to bring Shaterica back down to the station for another interview to clear things up.
But when they go by her place, they're met with a surprise.
They can't find her.
Shaterica is on the run.
When detectives investigating Melvin Maxwell Jr.'s murder attempt to locate Shaterica Purvis, hoping to clear up some discrepancies in her statement, she's suddenly nowhere to be found.
To detectives, it seems like a clear indication of guilt.
So at this point now, Shaterica is the prime suspect.
And with Shaterica now a fugitive, detectives contact the Gulf Coast Task Force.
We're less than 6 hours away from the border of Mexico. Most officers feel like, hey, we need to let Border Patrol know, and also let's let the U.S. Marshals know just in case she's trying to go on by a plane.
On June 28th, detectives get a hit.
What's up?
They get a phone call from Atlanta, Georgia.
It turns out she did indeed make a run for it, but it wasn't to the border or to Mexico. She was flagged in Atlanta while trying to board a flight to Jamaica.
She was going through U.S. Customs. They checked her name out and found out she had an open warrant for murder in Houston, Texas.
Customs agents take Shaterica into custody and contact the authorities in Houston.
Houston investigators came to interview her in Atlanta, and they asked her exactly what happened.
They are trying their best to get a confession, and Shaterica is not budging.
I told you I didn't do anything. I was just going on vacation.
They continue to press her.
They started throwing in different things in that interview, giving her a little room where maybe he got aggressive with you.
Slowly but surely, they break her down, and she starts to open up a little bit more.
Okay. It was the day of the 4th. We were having an argument about me leaving.
She tells them he came up from behind her and put his hand on her shoulders.
Hey, don't go, please.
Shaterica explains to detectives that she had been assaulted in the past.
She was still a little nervous and skittish about being touched. So when Melvin puts his hands on her shoulder, she freaks out.
And because he wouldn't get out of her personal space, she grabbed a butcher knife and stabbed him.
Get away from me!
What? The knife was one that they kept in the room for cooking.
She stabbed Melvin, and Melvin immediately goes and sits on the bed.
She tells officers that Melvin was still alive. He had sat on the bed. He was holding the spot where he was stabbed.
To Shaterica, hey, this was a minor injury. I just needed to get him off of me so I can leave. She packs up her stuff and she leaves.
I didn't mean to do it.
She assumed that he would call for help.
She didn't expect for him to die.
But for the detectives, her explanation comes far too late.
After giving her statement, her confession, Shaterica is arrested for murder.
In September 2021, Shaterica arrives back in Houston to await trial. And Melvin's family rejoices.
I think she thought she had got away with the crime. I was happy that they finally got her.
I had relief that finally justice would be served, finally that we can have some kind of closure.
But Shaterica will never stand trial for Melvin's murder.
While she's awaiting trial, she took a plea deal. The state offered her 22 years for a murder charge, which she accepted.
She's eligible for parole after serving half her sentence.
We was hoping that she would get 45 years, but we didn't want to really go through that brutal thing of seeing all that evidence.
I don't know if I could have took it sitting up in court, looking at all the gory stuff and all the negativity that would be brought up about him, and he wasn't here to defend himself.
Instead, Melvin's family focuses on healing.
I forgave her for me, so I can live, and so I can continue to love my son and continue to be there for his children. Nobody has control over death. Only God.
Although moving on doesn't mean letting go of the son and father they all loved.
His children are very resilient. Even the baby. I've got pictures all over the house. I talk to him every day about his dad. And so that he knows that his dad really loved him.
My prayers is to give me strength to make it through it. But I'm also a realist. You know, I realize that I'm never gonna be okay. It's heartbreaking. And no parent should bury their kid. It's just against all the rules of nature. It's hard, you never get over it.
Our children are precious, and they can be here today and gone tomorrow. I will always love Melvin Joseph Maxwell Jr., and may he rest in heaven peacefully.
When we think of the island of Oahu, our minds naturally drift toward the postcard imagery that has defined Hawaii for generations. We envision the pristine white sands of Waikiki, the rolling, emerald ridges of the Kola mountain range and the endless, shimmering expanse of the Pacific Ocean reflecting a perpetual summer sun. It is a place sold to the world as a sanctuary, a paradise completely insulated from the grit and grime of mainland urban sprawl. But any local, anyone who has truly lived on the island, knows that where the sun shines the brightest, the shadows cast are often the darkest and the most impenetrable. There is an entirely different Hawaii that exists away from the resort lobbies and the guided tours. It is a world of industrial zones, forgotten dirt roads, and towering concrete infrastructure that slices through the tropical landscape like scars. It is within these overlooked spaces, beneath the elevated highways and inside the quiet, desolate corridors of the island, that some of the darkest chapters of Hawaiian history have been written in silence. In the realm of true crime, we are often conditioned to expect a certain narrative structure when a case goes cold. We are accustomed to a void of information. We hear stories of people who simply vanish into thin air, leaving behind locked doors and untouched dinners, offering investigators absolutely nothing to work with. We hear of crime scenes completely wiped clean of forensic evidence, or murders committed in such remote, inaccessible locations that weeks or even months pass before a discovery is made, letting the elements destroy whatever truth was left behind. In those cases, the mystery stems from an absolute absence of data. The investigators are left grasping at shadows, trying to build a puzzle without having any of the pieces in the box. But there is another kind of cold case. A type of unsolved mystery that is far more haunting, far more deeply frustrating than a simple disappearance. It is the case where the investigators have almost everything they need. They have the victim. They have the crime scene. They have the timeline. They have the physical evidence. They even have a clear, documented photograph of a prime suspect engaging with the victim's property just hours after the death. And yet, despite having all these pieces spread out clearly on the table, the final picture refuses to come together. This is the exact torment of the Gregory M. Yamada case. It is a story that defies the typical logic of an unsolved homicide, presenting a paradox that has haunted the Honolulu Police Department and the community for nearly 4 decades. It is a narrative built upon stark contrasts, the violent, brutal reality of a young life extinguished in the dirt, juxtaposed against the cold, mechanical, and mundane recording of a financial transaction just a few miles away. To understand the depth of this mystery, we must travel back to the late summer of 1986. The date is September 8th. The era is vastly different from the one we inhabit today. This is a time before the absolute interconnectedness of the digital age. In 1986, there are no smartphones pinging cell towers every few seconds to create a digital map of a person's movements. There are no social media platforms broadcasting a victim's final thoughts or interactions. There are no automated license plate readers on the highways, and the network of closed-circuit television cameras is incredibly sparse, relegated mostly to high-security bank vaults and a few commercial centers. In this analog world, people can move with a level of anonymity that is almost unimaginable today. If you want to disappear, you simply walk away. If you commit a crime in the darkness is often enough to protect you. On this particular September day, the focus centers on a specific, grim location on the western side of the island. It is an area known historically as Cane Hall Road. Today, the surrounding region of Waikele has seen massive commercial and residential development, transforming into a bustling hub of outlet malls and suburban neighborhoods. But in 1986, it was a very different environment. The name Cane Hall Road itself speaks to the island's agricultural past, referring to the dirt and gravel paths used by heavy trucks to transport harvested sugarcane. By the mid-80s, this specific stretch of road beneath the H1 freeway and the Waikele overpass had become an isolated, liminal space. It was a place characterized by dirt, concrete, and the constant, dull roar of vehicles passing high overhead. The massive concrete pillars supporting the freeway created a shadowy, cavernous environment down below, untouched by the Hawaiian sun. It was not a place of recreation. It was not a place where people went for a casual stroll. It was a transitional void, a place you only found yourself in if you were working, if you were lost, or if you were looking for a place where no one else would look. It was in this desolate, shadow-drenched corridor beneath the roar of the highway that the body of 21-year-old Gregory M. Yamada was discovered on the ground. 21 is an age that barely crosses the threshold into adulthood. It is an age characterized by potential, by the very beginning of a life story, not its violent conclusion. When a young man is found dead at the bottom of a massive concrete overpass, the initial human instinct, and often the initial investigative instinct, might lean toward a tragic accident. Perhaps he was walking along the shoulder of the freeway high above in the dark. Perhaps he lost his footing. Perhaps he made a terrible, fatal misjudgment of the barrier. A fall from that height is catastrophic, inflicting massive trauma on the human body, enough to instantly end a life. But forensic science leaves no room for assumptions, and the autopsy of Gregory Yamada quickly shattered any illusion of a tragic accident. The medical examiners, meticulously documenting the injuries on the young man's body, found a terrifying narrative written in the trauma. Yes, there was damage consistent with a massive fall. But beneath that, there was something else. There were injuries, specific patterns of blunt force trauma, that could not be explained by gravity and concrete alone. The investigators reached a chilling, undeniable conclusion. Gregory Yamada had been severely beaten before he ever went over the edge. This was not an accident. This was a homicide. The realization that Gregory was attacked shifts the entire context of the scene beneath the Waikele overpass. The towering structure above was no longer just a piece of highway infrastructure. It had been weaponized. The implications are horrifying to consider. Did the attackers beat Gregory on the shoulder of the busy H1 freeway, a chaotic and desperate struggle, while cars sped by completely oblivious to the violence happening just feet away? Or did they beat him somewhere else, somewhere private and quiet, only to transport his battered, perhaps unconscious body to the overpass to dispose of him like refuse, letting gravity finish the brutal work they had started? The sheer physical effort required to lift a grown man over a safety barrier speaks to a profound level of determination and malice. With the cause of death firmly established as murder, the Honolulu Police Department mobilized, stepping into the daunting task of unraveling a homicide with no obvious witnesses. The scene beneath the freeway offered up its forensic secrets, but it did not offer up a name. There was no killer standing by, with a confession. There was no smoking gun left in the dirt. The case seemed destined to enter the agonizingly slow grind of a standard homicide investigation, relying on knocking on doors, interviewing acquaintances, and hoping someone, somewhere, would eventually talk. But then, the case fractured into something entirely unique and deeply unsettling. As detectives worked diligently to reconstruct the victim's life, pulling his financial records and tracking his bank accounts to see if money had been a motive, they discovered an anomaly. It was a piece of evidence so glaring, so bizarrely timed, that it instantly became the anchor of the entire investigation. The timeline of September 8, 1986, holds a terrifying truth. Sometime before the sun set, Gregory Yamada was dead, his body lying broken in the dirt beneath the Waikele overpass, his life violently stolen. And yet, at approximately 6 p.m. that very same evening, while Gregory lay in a morgue or at the crime scene, his bank account was active. Miles away from the desolate shadows of Cane Hall Road, in the town of Waianae on the leeward coast of the island, a man approached an automated teller machine at the Honolulu Federal Savings and Loan Branch. He stood before the machine, illuminated by the harsh fluorescent lights of the bank. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a plastic card, and inserted it into the slot. He typed in a personal identification number. The machine processed the request, the gears turned, and the transaction was recorded. But this was not just a digital footprint on a bank ledger. In 1986, ATMs were a relatively modern convenience, and the banks protecting them were the few places equipped with surveillance cameras. As this man stood there, withdrawing funds or checking the balance, the camera mounted in the machine snapped his photograph. A static, grainy, black and white image was burned into the security tape. The card that this unidentified man slid into the machine in Waianae belonged to Gregory M. Yamada. This single, silent image is what elevates this case from a tragic, anonymous highway dumping into a haunting psychological thriller. It presents an agonizing, visceral connection between the living and the dead. Who is this man staring passively into the lens of the bank camera? Is he the monster who beat a 21-year-old boy and threw his body from a bridge? Did he stand over Gregory, rifle through his pockets, and take his wallet as a twisted trophy or a desperate grab for cash? Or is the truth somehow stranger? Is this man merely an opportunist, a scavenger who stumbled across a discarded wallet on the street, entirely unaware that the plastic card in his hand belonged to a murdered man whose body was just found miles away? If he is the killer, the arrogance or the sheer stupidity of standing in front of a bank camera just hours after committing murder is staggering. He thought he had committed the perfect crime, silencing his victim in the most desolate place he could find, only to walk directly into the unblinking eye of a machine. He left behind the most powerful piece of evidence any detective could ever ask for, his own face. And yet, this is where the true terror of the Gregory Yamada case resides. Investigators have the face of a man intrinsically tied to a murder. They have the time, the location, the stolen property, and the photograph. But as the sun set on September 8, 1986, and as the decades began to slowly roll by, that face remained just a face. No name was ever attached to it. The ghost on the camera slipped back into the Hawaiian night, leaving behind a frozen image and a young man dead in the dirt, initiating a mystery that would refuse to be solved. When an investigator steps up to a murder scene, the physical evidence provides the mechanics of the death, but the identity of the victim provides the soul of the investigation. In most homicide cases, the victim is a tapestry of relationships, employment histories, daily routines, and social circles that detectives can meticulously comb through to find the singular thread leading to a killer. We expect victims to leave behind a rich, detailed footprint of interactions, enemies, lovers, and friends. But in the case of Gregory M. Yamada, the narrative comes to an abrupt and deeply frustrating halt. Gregory is essentially a ghost in the public record. Beyond his name and his age of 21 at the time of his brutal murder, the public archives offer almost nothing about who this young man truly was, what he loved, where he worked, or the dreams he harbored. This void of information is not just a tragic erasure of a young life, it is a monumental hurdle for the detectives tasked with finding his murderer. A victimology report is usually the compass that guides a homicide detective, pointing them toward individuals who might have had a motive, the means, or the opportunity to commit the ultimate act of violence. Without a clear picture of Gregory's daily existence, investigators are forced to navigate this dark labyrinth entirely blindfolded, relying solely on the silent, cold facts left behind at the scene of the crime and the haunting digital echo of his bank account. To be 21 years old is to stand precisely on the threshold of genuine adulthood. It is an age defined by transition, a chaotic but beautiful period where the structures of childhood have fallen away and the architecture of a permanent, independent life is just beginning to take shape. For most 21-year-olds, days are consumed by the anxieties and excitements of early careers, intense friendships, emerging romantic entanglements, and the slow, sometimes painful process of discovering personal identity. It is an age of immense vulnerability, where poor decisions are easily made, and trust is often given too freely to those who might not deserve it. When a life is extinguished at this exact moment, it leaves behind an unbearable sense of interrupted potential. The tragedy of Gregory Yamada is amplified by this interruption. We do not know if he was a student struggling through exams, a young worker trying to establish a foothold in the Honolulu economy, or a free spirit navigating the complexities of island life. We only know that his journey was violently halted, his future erased by hands that remain hidden in the shadows of history. This lack of personal texture makes the crime feel even more senseless and random, stripping the narrative of the very human elements that usually help us make sense of such horrific violence, and leaving behind a hollow sense of profound injustice. Because the public record regarding Gregory's personal life is so exceptionally limited, the story of his murder becomes an exercise in reading the negative space. Detectives cannot easily point to a jealous former partner, a disgruntled coworker, or a shady business associate, because the existence of these figures in Gregory's life remains largely obscured from public view. Instead, the investigation must lean heavily, almost exclusively, on the physical remnants of his final hours. The environment where his body was found, the brutal nature of his injuries, the specific vehicle that might have been used to transport him, and the crucial banking transactions become the only voices capable of speaking on his behalf. The investigators are forced to reverse engineer a life from the moment of its violent conclusion. They must look at a battered body at the bottom of a freeway overpass and ask not just who did this, but what sequence of life events placed a 21-year-old man in that specific, terrible location on that specific, fatal day. Every bruise, every angle of the concrete, and every timestamp on a bank record must carry the heavy weight of a biography that can no longer be told by the person who actually lived it. To fully grasp the agonizing difficulty of this investigation, we must firmly anchor ourselves in the reality of the year 1986. Today, we live in an era of absolute surveillance and inescapable digital connectivity. We carry devices in our pockets that track our every step, our every purchase, and our every communication. Our vehicles record our precise destinations, our social media accounts broadcast our moods and exact locations, and artificial intelligence can recognize our faces in a crowded street in a matter of milliseconds. Solving a crime in the modern age often involves sifting through an overwhelming mountain of data to find the electronic footprint of a killer. But in 1986, the world was deeply, profoundly analog. Honolulu was a bustling, vibrant city, but it existed completely off the digital grid. There were no cellular networks constantly pinging the whereabouts of Gregory or his attackers. There were no global positioning systems to map the route taken to the Waikele overpass. The concept of automated facial recognition was the stuff of science fiction, not established police procedure. If a person walked down a street in the late afternoon, they existed only in the memories of the people who happened to glance in their direction. Once that moment passed, the record of their presence vanished entirely into the atmosphere. This analog reality is what makes the location of Gregory's murder so critically important and so devastatingly effective for the perpetrators. The area beneath the H1 freeway near Cane Hall Road was isolated not just geographically, but chronologically. It was a massive blind spot in a world that already had very few eyes. Without the safety net of modern technology, investigations relied heavily on the physical environment and the willingness of human witnesses to step forward. But one must ask who goes walking beneath a roaring freeway in the fading light of a September evening. Who is there to hear a desperate physical struggle over the deafening noise of the heavy traffic passing high above? The killers, whether by careful, premeditated design or sheer, brutal luck, chose a location that maximized the era's inherent lack of visibility. They exploited a massive gap in the fabric of society, a place where a violent altercation could unfold in complete, undisturbed secrecy. The physical evidence left in the dirt and on the concrete barrier above had to be interpreted without the aid of high-definition video or digital forensics. Detectives had to rely on measuring tape, rudimentary photography, and the slow, methodical science of early forensic pathology to even begin to understand the complex geometry of the violence that abruptly ended Gregory's life. In this landscape of deep shadow and silence, the sudden emergence of a financial transaction is nothing short of miraculous, yet simultaneously maddening for law enforcement. In 1986, automated teller machines were still a relatively new phenomenon, slowly changing the fundamental way people interacted with their personal finances. The presence of a security camera in these early machines was a rudimentary attempt at security, utilizing low-resolution, black-and-white videotape that was often recorded over or degraded by constant daily use. When the unidentified man stepped up to that specific machine in Waianae, he was interacting with one of the very few pieces of connected technology available at the time. It was a rare, fleeting intersection between the physical world and a recorded security system. For the police department, securing that image was a massive investigative breakthrough, a brilliant beacon of hope in an otherwise impenetrable darkness. It provided law enforcement with a face, a distinct physical description, and a precise geographical location miles away from the initial murder scene, establishing a tangible timeline of events immediately following the victim's death. Yet, the very technology that provided this crucial clue also highlighted the severe limitations of the era. Having a photograph in 1986 was absolutely not the same as having a named suspect in custody. Without a centralized, digitized national database of faces to rapidly cross-reference, that single photograph was essentially an isolated artifact. It required a human being to look at the image, organically recognize the facial features, and make the conscious, sometimes frightening decision to contact the authorities. If the man in the photograph was a drifter, a transient, or someone who existed entirely on the fringes of society, the chances of a successful identification plummeted drastically. The police were forced to rely on the fragile hope that someone in the local community would see the grainy image on a television news broadcast or printed in a morning newspaper and feel a moral obligation to speak up. The photograph became a silent, desperate plea broadcast out into the void, waiting for a single echo of recognition that, for decades, would never materialize. It is this excruciating paradox, the possession of a suspect's actual image trapped within an era completely incapable of easily identifying him, that cements the enduring tragedy of the Gregory Yamada investigation. The detectives are left holding a solitary key to a door that they cannot find, forced to continuously stare at the face of a man who holds the answers to how a young life was violently stolen, trapped forever in the amber of a 1986 security tape. The physical reality of September the 8th, 1986 began with a grim and irreversible discovery that permanently shattered the quiet obscurity of the desolate stretch of earth known historically as Kane Hall Road, deep in the shadows beneath the towering concrete expanse of the H1 freeway and the Waikele overpass, where the lifeless body of 21-year-old Gregory M. Yamada was found discarded in the dirt. The environment itself played a crucial and terrifying role in the initial perception of the scene because this specific location was essentially an industrial crypt hidden away from the vibrant tropical sunlight that defined the rest of the Hawaiian island of Oahu, characterized instead by massive gray support pillars, heavy gravel-scattered industrial debris, and the ceaseless, deafening roar of high-speed automotive traffic passing blindly on the elevated roadways far above the ground. When law enforcement officers and forensic personnel first arrived at this isolated transitional space, their immediate visual assessment of the tragedy likely leaned toward the most common explanation for a broken human body found directly beneath a massive vertical drop, which is the horrifying but mathematically simple outcome of a high-altitude fall. A human body plummeting from the height of a major freeway overpass sustains catastrophic deceleration injuries upon impact with the unyielding ground below, resulting in massive skeletal fractures, devastating internal hemorrhaging, and almost instantaneous death, making it incredibly easy for an initial observer to categorize the heartbreaking scene as a tragic accident, a terrible misstep in the dark, or a devastating act of personal despair. However, the fundamental nature of criminal investigation requires a total suspension of initial assumptions, demanding instead that every physical anomaly be meticulously measured and every wound be scientifically categorized to either confirm or completely dismantle the preliminary hypothesis of the scene. As the medical examiners began their solemn and meticulous work of analyzing the extensive trauma inflicted upon the young man, they slowly uncovered a terrifying narrative written directly into the physiological damage that completely contradicted the simple physics of a vertical plunge. Beneath the catastrophic damage caused by the violent impact with the earth, the forensic experts identified a distinct and separate constellation of injuries, specifically patterns of severe blunt force trauma that were entirely inconsistent with the mechanics of a fall. These specific contusions, lacerations, and targeted structural damages indicated beyond any shadow of a medical doubt that Gregory had been subjected to a vicious and sustained physical assault well before his body ever crossed the concrete threshold of the overpass barrier. This profound forensic revelation instantly transformed the psychological and legal reality of the location from a site of a tragic mishap into a formalized theater of extreme malicious violence, definitively reclassifying the death of the 21-year-old as a brutal homicide. The realization that Gregory was systematically beaten before being subjected to the fatal drop introduced a horrifying element of deliberate human malice, forcing the lead detectives to confront a complex and agonizing geographic puzzle that remains officially unsolved to this very day. The investigators were forced to divide their operational focus to address two primary and equally disturbing spatial theories regarding the precise sequence of the violent events that culminated in the dumping of the victim. The first hypothesis posited that the physical altercation, the brutal beating that incapacitated the young man, occurred directly on the elevated shoulder of the busy highway or right along the edge of the Waikele overpass itself. This terrifying scenario suggests a chaotic, desperate, and highly visible struggle unfolding merely inches away from lanes of high-speed traffic, where passing motorists, completely oblivious to the lethal violence happening just outside their car windows, whizzed past the unfolding murder in the fading light. If the fatal attack happened on the bridge, the perpetrators would have had to endure an incredibly high risk of accidental discovery, engaging in a severe physical confrontation in an exposed environment before undertaking the immense and physically demanding task of lifting the dead or unconscious weight of a grown adult male high enough to clear the safety barriers and send him plummeting into the dark abyss below. The sheer adrenaline and violent determination required to execute such a maneuver on a public roadway speaks to a chaotic and deeply aggressive confrontation, perhaps a sudden escalation of an argument or a targeted roadside ambush that quickly spiraled into lethal force. Conversely, the second primary investigative hypothesis paints an even more sinister and coldly calculated picture, suggesting that Gregory was brutally assaulted at a completely different, unrecorded secondary location entirely removed from the deafening noise of the freeway. In this chilling scenario, the young man could have been attacked in a private residence, an abandoned lot, or an isolated alleyway where the assailants had the terrifying luxury of time and privacy to inflict their brutal damage without any immediate fear of passing witnesses or law enforcement. Interruption. Once the severe beating was concluded and the victim was either deceased or deeply incapacitated, the killers would have then been forced to treat his broken body as a piece of hazardous cargo, loading him into the trunk or the back seat of an unidentified transport vehicle to begin a tense and highly calculated journey across the island. The perpetrators would have had to carefully navigate the local road networks, actively seeking out a suitable location for disposal before ultimately selecting the desolate, shadowy expanse of the Waikele overpass as the perfect high-altitude dumping ground to erase their victim from the world. This secondary location theory implies a chilling degree of premeditation, logistical planning, and cold-blooded execution, suggesting a concerted effort to physically separate the actual scene of the violent murder from the final resting place of the body in order to deliberately confuse the forensic timeline and intentionally completely destroy any coherent investigative trail. The agonizing reality for the detectives working the cold case was that the available physical evidence scattered in the dirt of Cane Hall Road was entirely insufficient to definitively prove either of these terrifying spatial theories, leaving the exact origin point of the deadly violence shrouded in a permanent, impenetrable fog of uncertainty. There were no blood trails extending down the highway shoulder to confirm a roadside struggle, and there were no distinctive tire tracks or transfer evidence found near the body to definitively prove the presence of a specific transport vehicle, leaving the investigators trapped in an endless loop of unanswerable logistical questions. The location of the body ultimately served only as the violent endpoint of Gregory's unknown final journey, offering absolutely no concrete directional arrows pointing backward toward the individuals who actually initiated the horrific sequence of events. The absolute silence of the scene, the complete lack of physical witnesses coming forward to report a struggle on the bridge, and the total absence of any obvious weapon left behind in the dirt threatened to plunge the investigation into an immediate and irreversible stall, severely limiting the avenues of traditional police work. It is in this exact type of forensic vacuum, where cases go permanently cold, where the lack of environmental data points forces dedicated detectives to endlessly re-examine the same meager pile of evidence, hoping for a microscopic revelation that never actually materializes. But just as the shadows beneath the Waikele overpass seemed ready to completely swallow the truth of the murder forever, the investigation was suddenly jolted completely in a new direction, not by a piece of physical evidence found in the dirt, but by a silent digital alarm echoing from a completely different part of the island. The discovery of the body was merely the violent physical anchor of the mystery, but the true psychological terror of the case was about to be revealed through the methodical and routine examination of the deceased young man's personal financial footprint, proving that the perpetrators were not simply content with taking his life, but were also brazenly interacting with the remnants of his identity, while his broken body was still lying in the dark waiting to be discovered by the authorities. This realization that the violence did not end with the fall from the overpass, but continued as a cold and calculated financial exploitation, fundamentally shifted the entire paradigm of the investigation, forcing the police to look away from the physical geometry of the overpass and focus entirely on a grainy black and white image captured miles away that would become the single most haunting and frustrating piece of evidence in the entire history of the Honolulu Police Department. The absolute precision required by the forensic pathologists to differentiate between the blunt force trauma inflicted by a human assailant and the catastrophic skeletal devastation caused by a high-velocity impact with the solid earth cannot be understated, because it was this exact medical distinction that formed the entire legal foundation of the homicide investigation. When a body strikes the ground from such an extreme height, the sheer kinetic energy transferred through the skeletal structure causes massive compound fractures, internal organ ruptures, and widespread hemorrhaging that can easily mask earlier injuries, making it exceptionally difficult to identify a pre-existing contusion or a defensive wound sustained during a desperate physical struggle for survival. The medical examiners had to act with the utmost meticulous care, essentially conducting a microscopic archaeological excavation of the trauma, peeling back the devastating outer layers of the fall damage to carefully document the specific localized bruises, the defensive lacerations on the extremities, and the targeted craniofacial impacts that strongly indicated the vicious use of fists or perhaps a heavy blunt instrument wielded by an attacker with lethal intent. Every single anomaly found on the skin, every unnatural angle of a broken bone that defied the physics of the vertical drop served as a silent but undeniable testament to the horrific violence that Gregory endured in the terrifying moments before he was sent over the edge of the concrete barrier into the abyss. This horrifying realization forces us to deeply consider the immense psychological terror that the young victim must have experienced during his final conscious moments, trapped in a desperately violent situation against unknown assailants, realizing that his life was being violently stolen from him. In a desolate environment where no one could hear his cries for help over the mechanical roar of the highway. The absolute brutality of the method of disposal also speaks volumes about the distinct psychological profile of the individuals responsible for this heinous act, because throwing a severely injured human being from a towering overpass is an action that demonstrates a complete and total devaluation of human life, treating a 21-year-old man with a family and a future as nothing more than disposable refuse to be scattered in the shadows and forgotten by the world above. Furthermore, the physical strength and the sheer aggressive determination required to physically maneuver a battered, perhaps incapacitated adult male body over the reinforced safety railings of a major elevated freeway strongly suggest the highly probable involvement of multiple attackers working in a coordinated, sinister tandem to execute the final devastating phase of the murder. A single perpetrator, unless possessing extraordinary physical size and strength, would face immense logistical difficulty in lifting dead weight over a barrier, while simultaneously maintaining situational awareness to avoid being spotted by passing vehicles, thereby making the theory of a coordinated group assault incredibly compelling to the detectives trying to map out the exact dynamics of the crime. The investigators, canvassing the harsh, unforgiving terrain of Kane Hall Road, had to meticulously search every single inch of the gravel, the concrete pillars, and the surrounding vegetation, looking for any microscopic trace of the struggle, such as a torn piece of fabric, a dropped personal item, a faint smear of blood, or a distinct shoe print that could definitively link the primary assault to the exact location of the fall. However, the harsh environmental realities of the industrial site, the constant settling of dust, the vibrations from the heavy traffic above, and the sheer vastness of the shaded underpass acted as a natural forensic eraser, actively working to degrade and destroy any fragile trace evidence that the killers might have inadvertently left behind in their desperate haste to flee the scene. This severe lack of corroborating environmental evidence at the drop site forced the law enforcement officials to constantly vacillate between the two agonizing spatial theories, never fully able to commit to the roadside ambush scenario or the secondary location transport hypothesis, because the physical environment stubbornly refused to yield the decisive clues necessary to close the investigative loop. The detectives found themselves staring up at the massive concrete underbelly of the Waikele overpass, tracing the deadly trajectory of the fall in their minds, endlessly debating whether the lethal violence originated just feet above their heads in the chaotic traffic, or if it was imported from some dark hidden corner of the island entirely unknown to them. This fundamental uncertainty regarding the actual origin point of the murder created a massive structural weakness in the foundation of the entire investigation, because, without knowing exactly where the attack began, the police were completely unable to accurately define the perimeter of the crime scene, unable to pinpoint the exact neighborhood to canvass for potential witnesses, and completely unable to track the specific movements of the suspects in the crucial hours leading up to the violent dumping of the body. The shadows of Kane Hall Road offered only the brutal, grim conclusion of Gregory Yamada's life, leaving the intricate, violent narrative of how he actually arrived at that terrible destination completely obscured by the passage of time and the complete silence of the perpetrators. It became excruciatingly clear that the physical location beneath the highway had yielded all of its macabre secrets, and that if the investigators were ever going to pierce the veil of this deeply disturbing mystery, they would have to completely shift their focus away from the dirt and the concrete and look toward the only other tangible thread connecting the murdered young man to the living world, which was his personal property. The transition from a static physical crime scene investigation to a dynamic pursuit of a stolen financial asset marked the absolute critical turning point in the Yamada case, transforming a standard, albeit brutal, homicide inquiry into a desperate, frantic race to identify a nameless, faceless phantom who had brazenly stepped out of the shadows to utilize the dead man's bank card. This sudden, unexpected pivot from the visceral, horrific reality of blunt force trauma and a fatal fall to the cold, clinical environment of automated bank records and grainy surveillance footage highlighted the deeply complex and multi-layered nature of this particular cold case, demonstrating that the perpetrators were not only violent but also possessed a chilling degree of audacity that ultimately provided the police with their single most important piece of evidence. The discovery at the overpass was merely the first devastating chapter in a story that was about to become infinitely more complicated as the focus of the manhunt shifted drastically from the desolate stretch of Kane Hall Road to the harsh, unblinking fluorescent lights of a bank ATM miles away, where a single silent photograph would forever alter the trajectory of the investigation and cement the case in the dark annals of Hawaiian true crime history for decades to come. When law enforcement officers are confronted with a remote and isolated crime scene, especially one that is entirely devoid of direct physical witnesses or immediate forensic leads, they must adhere to a rigid and universally established investigative protocol that relies on answering three fundamental foundational questions, which are identifying the victim, identifying the perpetrator, and establishing the exact sequence of events that brought the victim to that specific desolate location in the first place. In the highly complex and deeply disturbing case of 21-year-old Gregory M. Yamada, the first of these three critical pillars was established with relative speed, allowing the detectives to put a name and an age to the shattered body discovered in the dirt and shadows of Kane Hall Road beneath the massive concrete expanse of the Waikele overpass. However, the rapid, successful identification of the young victim only served to highlight the terrifying and seemingly impenetrable darkness that surrounded the remaining two foundational questions, because the physical environment where the young man was found violently discarded stubbornly refused to yield any actionable intelligence regarding the identity of the person or persons responsible for inflicting the brutal, lethal trauma. The grim reality of a remote dumping ground is that there is never a killer standing by waiting to offer a tearful confession to the arriving authorities, and in this particular instance, there were absolutely no bystanders coming forward to publicly report witnessing a violent physical struggle taking place on the shoulder of the busy H1 freeway directly above the discovery site. The total absence of corroborating eyewitness testimony, combined with the severe environmental degradation of whatever fragile microscopic physical evidence might have initially existed in the industrial dirt, threatened to plunge the entire homicide investigation into a permanent, irreversible standstill, effectively turning the file into a cold case before the initial autopsy reports were even fully finalized and filed away in the police department archives. The detectives were trapped in an agonizing forensic vacuum, staring endlessly at the horrifying physical mechanics of a brutal beating and a catastrophic high-altitude fall, without possessing a single credible lead to point them toward the actual perpetrators of the violence. It is precisely within these agonizing moments of investigative stagnation that standard police procedure mandates a complete transition away from the physical geometry of the crime scene and a deep dive into the victim's personal and financial background, hoping to uncover a hidden motive buried within the mundane administrative details of their daily existence. The investigators meticulously initiated a comprehensive audit of Gregory's personal belongings and financial footprint, diligently checking to see if any physical property was missing from his person when his body was discovered in the shadows of the underpass. It was during this methodical, routine examination of the deceased young man's financial records that the detectives suddenly stumbled upon a glaring, impossible anomaly that fundamentally shattered the established timeline of the murder and instantly provided the entire investigation with its most crucial and terrifying piece of evidence. The investigators discovered that the personal automated teller machine card belonging to Gregory Yamada was not only missing from the crime scene, but had actually been actively utilized in a financial transaction hours after the young man was already lying dead in the dirt beneath the highway. The chilling realization that a piece of the victim's personal property was actively moving through the Hawaiian community, while his broken body remained undiscovered at the bottom of the Waikele overpass, injected a profound sense of psychological terror into the case, completely upending the investigators' understanding of the post-murder sequence of events. The timeline of September the 8th, 1986 suddenly became a horrifying map of overlapping realities, where the definitive end of Gregory's life violently intersected with the continued cold and calculated actions of a nameless, faceless phantom operating in the fading evening light. The official police records indicate that at approximately 6 o'clock in the evening on that very same fatal Monday, a man confidently approached the exterior automated teller machine at the Honolulu Federal Savings and Loan Branch, situated in the town of Waianae on the leeward coast of Oahu. This specific geographical movement from the desolate crime scene near the Waikele overpass in the central western part of the island all the way out to the coastal community of Waianae creates a highly significant and deeply intriguing spatial puzzle for the detectives to analyze. If the individual utilizing the stolen bank card was indeed the primary perpetrator of the violent homicide, this specific route suggests a deliberate, calculated flight path away from the immediate vicinity of the murder scene, potentially indicating that the killer lived in the Waianae area, felt comfortable operating within its boundaries, or was simply attempting to put as much physical distance as possible between himself and the dead body before attempting to extract cash from the victim's account. This geographic shift forces the investigators to desperately attempt to reconstruct the invisible path taken by the suspect, searching for missing pieces of a logistical puzzle that includes identifying the type of vehicle used, determining the specific roadways taken, and calculating the exact travel time required to navigate from the heavy shadows of Cane Hall Road to the harsh fluorescent lights of the Coastal Bank branch. However, as the detectives painstakingly reviewed the available data, they were acutely aware that because the crime had occurred in the technologically limited era of 1986, the vast majority of the potential corroborating evidence, such as traffic camera recordings, highway toll data, and casual eyewitness accounts of a vehicle speeding toward the coast, were completely non-existent or had already vanished into the ether. The entire weight of this massive geographic and temporal mystery ultimately rested on a single fragile piece of mid-80s technology, which was the automated security camera securely mounted inside the banking machine at the Honolulu Federal Savings and Loan Branch. As the unidentified man stood before the machine at 6 o'clock in the evening and successfully executed a transaction using the deceased victim's personal card, the rudimentary mechanical lens of the security system silently captured his image, burning a grainy black and white photograph of his face onto a reel of security tape. This single silent photograph represents a monumental and almost unprecedented investigative breakthrough for a case that had initially presented itself as a completely unsolvable ghost story, providing the homicide detectives with a tangible physical target to pursue in their desperate hunt for justice. Yet the sheer existence of this photograph simultaneously introduces the most frustrating and agonizing paradox of the entire Gregory Yamada investigation, because capturing the image of a suspect's face is absolutely not the same thing as successfully identifying that suspect's legal name. The police department found themselves in possession of a clear visual representation of a man intimately connected to the immediate aftermath of a brutal murder, but because there was no comprehensive digitized national facial recognition database available in 1986, the photograph remained entirely useless unless a living human being actively recognized the face and willingly chose to contact law enforcement authorities. The investigators were forced to confront a terrifying array of hypothetical scenarios regarding the true nature and specific motivation of the unidentified man captured on the bank's security tape, completely unable to definitively prove any single theory without first obtaining the suspect's actual identity. The most immediate and logically direct hypothesis posits that the man staring blankly into the camera lens is the very same individual who brutally beat Gregory and callously threw his body from the elevated freeway, stealing the wallet and the bank card as a twisted financial reward for his lethal violence. If this primary theory is accurate, the motive for the brutal murder might have been a simple but devastatingly violent robbery gone wrong, or perhaps a targeted assault motivated by a pre-existing personal conflict that culminated in a lethal roadside confrontation and the subsequent theft of the victim's personal assets. However, the strict and unyielding parameters of the judicial system strictly prohibit the police from officially labeling the man in the photograph as the definitive killer without concrete corroborating evidence, because there are other equally plausible, albeit highly disturbing, alternative explanations for his possession of the dead man's card. It is entirely possible within the realm of investigative theory that Gregory voluntarily gave his card to a trusted acquaintance or a deceitful companion shortly before he was attacked and killed, meaning the man on the tape might simply be an opportunistic thief exploiting the tragic death of a friend rather than the actual architect of the murder itself. There is even a remote but chilling possibility that the man on the camera was completely uninvolved in the physical violence and merely acted as a silent scavenger, happening upon a discarded wallet in the street and deciding to illegally utilize the enclosed bank card, completely oblivious to the horrifying fact that its rightful owner was lying dead at the bottom of a nearby concrete overpass. Yet, even if this man was merely an opportunistic finder of lost property, his direct interaction with the murdered victim's financial accounts mere hours after the lethal timeline establishes him as the single most critical and undeniably important person of interest in the entire multi-decade-long history of the cold case. If the detectives could finally attach a verifiable name to the grainy face in the 1986 photograph, they could immediately open a dozen new critical avenues of inquiry, demanding to know exactly how he came into possession of the card, where he was physically located during the estimated time of the murder, what kind of transportation he had access to, and most importantly, whether he possessed any prior relationship or passing familiarity with the 21-year-old victim. The agonizing reality that has haunted the Honolulu Police Department for decades is the fact that if the man on the tape actually is the killer, his decision to use that stolen bank card at 6 o'clock in the evening on September the 8th was a monumental catastrophic error in criminal judgment. He likely walked away from the desolate shadows of the Waikele overpass believing he had committed the perfect, untraceable crime, leaving no witnesses and no physical trail behind in the dirt, only to immediately travel to Waianae and willingly place his own face in the center of the investigative frame, permanently linking himself to a homicide that would otherwise have remained entirely devoid of suspects. He believed that the dead could tell no tales and that the desolate highway would keep his violent secrets forever, but he completely failed to account for the silent, unblinking vigilance of the bank camera, which captured his image and preserved his arrogant mistake for generations of detectives to endlessly analyze. This single catastrophic mistake by the unidentified man transforms the entire narrative of the case from a story of absolute hopelessness into a story of suspended anticipation, where the police are not searching for microscopic clues in the dirt, but are simply waiting for one single individual in the public sphere to recognize a ghost from the past. The photograph stands as a permanent, haunting testament to the fact that the killer, or at the very least a crucial witness, walked directly into the light, leaving behind a permanent visual record that completely anchors the investigation to that fateful Monday evening and guarantees that the search for the truth regarding what actually happened to Gregory Yamada will never truly be abandoned until that specific face is finally given a name, allowing the authorities to finally understand the complete and devastating truth behind the brutal violence that took place in the shadows of the Hawaiian highway on that dark September night. Because the brutal murder of 21-year-old Gregory M. Yamada has technically never seen the inside of a courtroom, and because no formal charges have ever been filed against any named individual, the concept of a trial in this particular narrative must be entirely redefined, moving away from the traditional imagery of a judge and a jury, and focusing instead on the agonizing, relentless, and completely unforgiving trial of time itself. For the dedicated detectives of the Honolulu Police Department, the decades stretching from 1986 to the present day represent a deep professional purgatory, where the static visual evidence of a horrific crime remains perfectly preserved while the living, breathing context surrounding it slowly decays and fades into absolute obscurity. When a homicide investigation fails to generate an immediate arrest in the days and weeks following the discovery of the victim, the momentum of the case inevitably begins to shift. As the intense initial public interest wanes, forensic leads are exhausted, and the investigative resources are necessarily reallocated to address the fresh emergencies that continually arise in a major metropolitan area. The Gregory Yamada case file, however, never ever truly closed because it possessed a haunting, unique characteristic that prevented it from simply fading away into the standard bureaucratic archives, which was the undeniable existence of the bank surveillance photograph staring back at the investigators every time they opened the dossier. This single piece of black and white imagery served as a constant silent reprimand to the detectives, a visceral reminder that the face of a man intimately connected to the immediate aftermath of a brutal killing was safely captured on tape, yet completely managed to evade the colossal weight of the justice system for many decades. The agonizing reality of possessing a photograph but lacking a name creates a deeply frustrating investigative paradox, where the police know exactly what the person of interest looked like at 6 o'clock in the evening on September the 8th, 1986, but possess absolutely no mechanism to forcibly extract his legal identity from the silent image. The sheer passage of time significantly magnifies this immense investigative hurdle, because a photograph taken in the mid-1980s is essentially an unreliable historical artifact that becomes exponentially and rapidly less useful with every passing year, as the physical appearance of the man captured on the bank tape would have drastically altered as he aged, making him completely unrecognizable to the modern public. If the unidentified man is indeed the primary perpetrator of the violent homicide, he has spent the last several decades living as a completely free individual, while the young man he allegedly brutally discarded in the shadows beneath the Waikele overpass was entirely robbed of his stolen future. The horrifying possibility exists that this unidentified man simply integrated himself back into the normal rhythms of society, perhaps raising a family, holding down a steady job, and interacting with unsuspecting neighbors who actually have absolutely no idea that they are living next to an individual who may have beaten a 21-year-old boy to death and casually used his bank card just hours later. Alternatively, the suspect might have recognized the immense danger of remaining on the island of Oahu and used the stolen funds to permanently relocate to the mainland United States, effectively disappearing into the vast, sprawling population of a different time zone where his face would never be recognized on a local Hawaiian television news broadcast. There is also the very real and incredibly frustrating possibility that the man in the photograph has simply passed away in the intervening years, taking the absolute truth of what happened on Kane Hall Road directly to his grave and permanently closing the only viable avenue for obtaining a full, complete confession. Despite these overwhelming statistical odds and the crushing weight of the decades, the Honolulu Police Department fundamentally refused to completely surrender the case to the shadows, recognizing that murder in the state of Hawaii carries absolutely no statute of limitations and that a cold case is never ever truly closed as long as there is breath in the lungs of the investigators and a faint glimmer of hope for ultimate justice. This relentless administrative determination culminated in a major public initiative launched in September of 2021, marking precisely 35 years since the broken body of Gregory Yamada was discovered in the industrial dirt. In a highly calculated and deeply emotional appeal to the public, the Honolulu Police Department, in close conjunction with the local Crime Stoppers organization, made the strategic decision to deliberately reintroduce the 1986 automated teller machine surveillance photograph back into the modern media cycle. The strategic goal of this 35th anniversary public appeal was always incredibly simple, yet massively ambitious, heavily relying on the slight chance that the vast interconnectivity of the modern internet and the widespread reach of social media platforms could finally accomplish what the analog police work of 1986 simply could not. The authorities desperately hoped that by broadcasting the grainy face across vast modern digital networks, the image might finally cross the screen of a specific individual who possessed the missing contextual puzzle pieces, perhaps an estranged family member, a former coworker, a scorned romantic partner, or an old acquaintance who would suddenly recognize the distinct facial features staring back from the past. To heavily incentivize the active public participation, the Crime Stoppers organization emphasized that anyone providing actionable intelligence regarding the true identity of the unidentified man could completely retain their absolute anonymity, offering a safe and protected conduit for individuals who might be terrified of potential violent retaliation from a man capable of such extreme brutality. This desperate reliance on a 35-year-old photograph deeply underscores the profoundly unique tragedy of the entire investigation, because it highlights the agonizing fact that the police are not actually looking for microscopic forensic evidence or complex digital footprints, but are simply begging the universe for a single human name. The subsequent release of the security image also forces a profound philosophical re-examination of the specific actions taken by the suspect on the evening of the murder, because if this unidentified man truly is the killer, his decision to boldly step in front of the bank camera in YNI ultimately represents one of the most catastrophic and ironically arrogant blunders in the entire history of criminal behavior. He likely believed that by selecting an isolated, shadowy location like the desolate underpass to commit his own brutal violence, he had successfully insulated himself from any possibility of identification, operating under the deeply flawed assumption that the sheer physical isolation of the environment would permanently protect his lethal secret from the probing eyes of the law. He callously discarded Gregory's broken body in the dirt, assuming that the darkness would swallow the young man's existence and that the crime would remain a permanent, unsolved mystery, completely failing to recognize that his very own unbridled greed and his desperate desire for immediate selfish financial gratification would ultimately become his definitive undoing. By choosing to actively utilize the deceased victim's personal bank card just mere hours after the fatal timeline, the suspect willingly walked out of the impenetrable darkness of the crime scene and directly into the bright, unblinking fluorescent illumination of the financial institution, effectively handing the police department the absolute most powerful and enduring piece of evidence they could ever possibly hope to acquire. It is a deeply poetic and profoundly unsettling irony that the killer's own hubris and his callous disregard for the dead man's property are the exact elements that have kept this homicide investigation alive for almost fully 4 decades, ensuring that his face remains permanently trapped in the public record, completely unable to escape the relentless slow burn of the ongoing active police inquiry. The photograph acts as a permanent digital anchor, inextricably linking the nameless suspect to the brutal reality of the murder and ensuring that he can never truly completely relax because he must live with the constant terrifying knowledge that his face is sitting in a police file waiting for a single random person to finally make the crucial vital connection. Every single time the anniversary of the brutal murder approaches and the local Hawaiian news stations broadcast that grainy black and white image, the suspect, if he is indeed still alive, must experience a chilling spike of absolute terror, knowing that the authorities have completely refused to forget about the 21-year-old boy whose life was violently stolen in the shadows. The 35-year timeline also heavily underscores the immense agonizing emotional toll inflicted upon the victim's extended family and the broader community, who have been forced to endure decades of suffocating silence, completely denied the fundamental closure and the basic human justice that typically follows a successful criminal prosecution, forever waiting for a definitive resolution that never actually came to pass. The ultimate tragedy of the Gregory Yamato investigation lies not merely in the brutal cessation of a young life, but in the agonizing, unending silence that has followed in the wake of his murder, creating a suffocating atmosphere of unresolved grief that permanently tethers his memory to the darkest shadows of the Hawaiian landscape and forces the community to grapple with a deeply unsettling mystery that stubbornly refuses to fade into the forgotten annals of history. When we deeply reflect upon the sheer multitude of cold cases that languish in police department archives all around the world, we often find a depressing commonality rooted in a total absolute absence of actionable information, where exhausted investigators are left entirely devoid of physical evidence, lacking any viable suspects, and possessing absolutely no clear directional compass to guide their desperate, frantic search for the ultimate truth. The Gregory Yamato case, however, fundamentally subverts this traditional frustrating narrative of investigative emptiness by presenting a deeply terrifying and maddening paradox where the law enforcement authorities actually possess an overwhelming abundance of critical puzzle pieces, including a clearly identified victim, a definitive physical crime scene, a brutally precise methodology of murder, a stolen financial instrument, an undeniable post-mortem financial transaction, and most distressingly, a perfectly preserved photographic image of a primary person of interest. It is the agonizing psychological juxtaposition of possessing so much tangible physical evidence while simultaneously lacking the single most important identifying detail that elevates this specific homicide from a standard local tragedy into a profound, enduring torment for the dedicated detectives who have spent their entire professional careers desperately seeking justice for the fallen 21-year-old boy whose future was violently stolen in the dirt. Every single day that passes without a formal arrest serves as a bitter, haunting reminder of the agonizing questions that continue to echo through the empty industrial expanse beneath the Waikele overpass, demanding to know exactly who Gregory met in the fading light of that September evening and what specific sequence of catastrophic violent events led him to that desolate transitional corridor. We are permanently left to endlessly wonder if the young man was tragically betrayed by someone he deeply trusted, lured into a deadly, inescapable trap under the false comforting pretense of friendship, or if he was simply the unfortunate victim of a random, devastating encounter with a monstrous stranger who saw a fleeting opportunity for sudden, violent exploitation in the heavy shadows of the elevated highway. The absolute identity of the individual, or the coordinated group of individuals who ruthlessly beat him and physically threw his battered body from the towering concrete structure, remains entirely obscured by the relentless passage of time, leaving us completely unable to definitively determine if The unidentified man captured on the bank surveillance tape is the actual sinister architect of this brutal violence, or merely an opportunistic scavenger who stumbled upon the financial remains of a murdered man and decided to profit from the tragedy. If the unidentified figure staring blankly into the camera lens is indeed the killer, the sheer unmitigated audacity of his actions on that fateful Monday evening forces us to confront a terrifying psychological profile of a cold-blooded predator who feels absolutely no moral remorse for extinguishing a human life and possesses the staggering arrogance to immediately casually exploit the dead victim's bank account while the blood is scarcely dry on the concrete pillars of the overpass. This fundamental lingering uncertainty regarding the true nature and the specific operational involvement of the man in the photograph acts as a permanent, heavy psychological weight pressing down upon the entire island community, forever preventing any genuine sense of closure and ensuring that the terrifying narrative of the crime remains completely painfully unresolved. The absolute horror of this enduring cold case is severely magnified by the chilling realization that somewhere out there in the vast, sprawling anonymity of the modern world, a man has been quietly harboring the darkest secret imaginable for nearly 4 decades, walking among unsuspecting crowds, hiding behind a completely normal, mundane facade while secretly knowing exactly how Gregory Yamada spent his final terrifying moments on Earth before plummeting into the darkness. This chilling, deeply unsettling thought forces us to critically reevaluate our everyday casual interactions, recognizing that the ordinary faces we casually pass on the street or stand behind in a mundane grocery store line might actually conceal hidden histories of unspeakable violence, and that true real-world monsters rarely look like the exaggerated, grotesque caricatures presented in fictional media, but rather closely resemble the ordinary, unremarkable figure captured in that grainy 1986 bank surveillance photograph. The relentless passage of 35 long years has done absolutely nothing to diminish the profound moral imperative to definitively identify this specific man and hold him completely legally accountable for whatever sinister role he played in the immediate aftermath of the horrific homicide. Because the fundamental inherent value of Gregory's stolen life absolutely demands that the truth eventually be violently dragged out of the darkness and exposed to the harsh, unyielding light of rigorous judicial scrutiny. The local Hawaiian law enforcement agencies have repeatedly and publicly demonstrated their unwavering, steadfast commitment to this righteous principle by absolutely refusing to permanently relegate the investigative file to the dusty basement of forgotten local tragedies, choosing instead to actively, aggressively utilize modern public communication platforms to continuously broadcast the suspect's face into the collective consciousness of the modern digitally connected community. This relentless institutional dedication is deeply firmly rooted in the strict legal framework of the state of Hawaii, which explicitly mandates that the ultimate crime of murder carries absolutely no statute of limitations whatsoever, meaning that the legal clock will never simply run out on the perpetrators of this heinous act, and the heavy door to future prosecution will remain permanently wide open until the very end of recorded time. The seasoned police detectives understand with absolute crystal clarity that historical cases of this immense, staggering complexity are rarely solved by sudden, miraculous forensic scientific breakthroughs, but are almost always ultimately resolved by the fragile, shifting loyalties of complex human relationships, where a heavy, guilty conscience, a bitter domestic falling out, or a sudden, terrifying terminal illness finally compels someone to courageously step forward and speak the hidden name that has been buried in silence for so many agonizing years. Therefore, the haunting photograph of the unidentified man brazenly utilizing the dead boy's automated teller machine card stands as a permanent, unblinking sentry waiting patiently in the public domain for that inevitable sudden moment of human weakness or profound moral awakening when the impenetrable wall of silence finally crumbles and the specific legal identity of the ghost from 1986 is definitively, permanently revealed to the waiting authorities. Until that highly anticipated triumphant day finally arrives, the tragic story of Gregory Yamada remains a deeply haunting, unfinished symphony of sudden violence and unanswered agonizing questions, serving as a stark, terrifying, permanent reminder of the absolute fragility of human existence and the Terrifying, terrifying ease with which a vibrant person can be violently, abruptly erased from the physical world while their killer quietly, seamlessly vanishes into the mundane background of everyday society. The desolate, deep shadows beneath the heavy, imposing concrete infrastructure of the H1 freeway will forever carry the heavy, sorrowful emotional resonance of his unfulfilled stolen potential, silently demanding that we never ever avert our eyes from the grainy black and white image that alone holds the master key to unraveling the entire agonizing, complex mystery. We are deeply obligated as a compassionate, civilized society to continually, relentlessly bear witness to this specific tragedy, to continuously share the surveillance photograph across all available networks, to constantly ask the difficult, uncomfortable questions, and to actively keep the fragile memory of the young victim vibrantly alive, because allowing ourselves to forget him would be the ultimate unforgivable victory for the cruel individuals who so callously, carelessly threw his broken body into the industrial dirt without a second thought. The final concluding reflection on this devastating, deeply frustrating case is absolutely not one of complete paralyzing despair, but rather one of stubborn, enduring, fierce vigilance, recognizing that while true justice has been severely and agonizingly delayed by the passage of decades, it has absolutely not yet been permanently, irrevocably denied, and that the complex true crime narrative of Gregory Yamada is emphatically not a closed, sealed book, but merely a temporarily paused chapter, anxiously waiting for a single courageous human voice to finally provide the missing crucial name and write the concluding definitive sentence of absolute legal accountability. The remarkable fact that the unknown suspect's face has now miraculously survived multiple massive technological eras, successfully transitioning from a fragile, degrading physical security tape to a permanent, indestructible digital file distributed across the vast global internet, ironically ensures that his brief moment of arrogant, brazen exposure in YNI has achieved a terrifying, inescapable immortality, permanently locking him in a constant state of continuous, invisible digital pursuit where he can never truly rest. He can never truly safely know if the random person intently looking at him on the busy street is the one who will finally suddenly recognize the subtle, enduring facial architecture hidden beneath the deep wrinkles of advanced age, or if a simple, mundane, routine traffic stop might somehow unexpectedly trigger a rapid sequence of events that violently, permanently unravels the careful, deceptive, fabricated life he has meticulously constructed over the past several decades of unearned freedom. This constant, underlying, suffocating paranoia is the silent, invisible, devastating punishment continuously inflicted by the enduring public existence of the photograph, forming a psychological prison built completely out of his own greedy, arrogant mistakes and the unyielding, fierce persistence of the determined detectives who absolutely refuse to let the murdered victim be forgotten by the passage of time. In the end, the absolute, unvarnished truth of what actually transpired on the gravel of Cane Hall Road is currently known only to the dead young man whose voice was violently, prematurely silenced, and the unidentified silent ghost captured on the bank camera whose voice we are all still desperately, anxiously waiting to hear. But the enduring, powerful hope remains that time, the ultimate, relentless unraveler of all hidden secrets, will eventually force a final, devastating, undeniable reckoning, bringing brilliant light to the deepest shadows and profound, lasting peace to a restless, wandering soul who has waited far too long for his story to be fully, completely, and finally told to the world. As we reach the final contemplation of the Gregory Yamada tragedy, we must inevitably look beyond the raw forensic facts and the faded black and white surveillance photographs to examine the profound, enduring psychological scars left upon the collective consciousness of the Hawaiian community and the law enforcement professionals who have dedicated their lives to seeking an elusive justice for a young man they never personally knew but whose stolen future continues to desperately echo through the desolate concrete corridors of the island, where the agonizing reality of this unsolved mystery fundamentally challenges our inherent human desire for narrative resolution and moral equilibrium in a world that is so frequently defined by sudden, inexplicable acts of severe brutality. The physical location of Kane Hall Road beneath the massive imposing structure of the H1 freeway and the Waikele overpass has permanently transformed from a mere transitional industrial artery into a deeply solemn monument to unresolved trauma, a haunting geographic space where the vibrant tropical beauty of Oahu is violently intersected by the darkest, most sinister elements of human capability, forcing anyone who passes through those heavy shadows to briefly confront the terrifying fragility of existence and the uncomfortable truth that absolute monsters do not solely inhabit the realm of cinematic fiction, but actually walk among us, blending seamlessly into the mundane fabric of everyday society while harboring devastating secrets that could instantly, completely destroy the lives of those around them. To fully comprehend the monumental investigative challenge presented by this specific cold case, we must rigorously analyze the immense technological chasm that separates the original 1986 investigation from our current highly interconnected digital reality, where modern homicide detectives possess an almost godlike ability to instantly track cellular device movements, analyze complex global positioning system data, and deploy highly sophisticated automated facial recognition algorithms capable of identifying a suspect in a crowded global database within mere milliseconds. The detectives who originally responded to the brutalized body of the 21-year-old victim were forced to operate in a profoundly analog environment, relying entirely on rudimentary forensic pathology, manual fingerprint dusting, and the fragile, highly unreliable nature of human memory, where a single grainy photograph extracted from an early automated teller machine represented an absolute technological miracle rather than a standard piece of preliminary evidence. This extreme technological disparity places the modern cold case unit in a deeply agonizing predicament because they are currently armed with the most advanced investigative tools in human history, yet they remain completely paralyzed by the fundamental limitations of the original source material. Forever trapped trying to apply 21st century digital solutions to a deeply analog mid-20th century problem where the only remaining viable path to a successful prosecution relies not on artificial intelligence or advanced genetic genealogy, but rather on the incredibly unpredictable catalyst of human conscience. We must deeply consider the terrifying psychological landscape of the unidentified man captured on that fateful security tape, assuming he is indeed the primary architect of the lethal violence and has somehow managed to physically survive the subsequent 4 decades of complete freedom because his existence represents a chilling anomaly in the standard criminal justice system, where the vast majority of violent offenders are eventually caught by their own subsequent mistakes or the sheer relentless weight of their own overwhelming guilt. If this unknown individual is still walking the streets today, he has essentially spent his entire adult life constructing a massive, elaborate fortress of deception built upon a foundation of extreme violence, forcing him to constantly, perpetually guard his every word, his every reaction, and his every interaction to ensure that the horrific truth of what he actually did in the shadows of the Waikele overpass never accidentally slips past his meticulously cultivated facade of mundane normality. This requirement for constant absolute vigilance must inevitably generate a suffocating, deeply corrosive internal paranoia because he is fundamentally aware that the Honolulu Police Department has absolutely never closed the file and that the haunting photograph of his own face taken on that September evening continues to actively circulate through modern news channels and vast social media networks, essentially transforming the entire global internet into a massive, inescapable digital dragnet actively hunting for his true identity. He can never truly know if a casual glance from a stranger in a grocery store line is merely a fleeting moment of social interaction or the terrifying spark of genuine recognition that will finally, permanently, completely destroy his meticulously protected false reality, bringing the full devastating weight of the criminal justice system crashing down upon his head and exposing him to the world as a callous, brutal murderer who casually utilized a dead man's bank card while the victim's blood was barely dry on the concrete highway pillars. This enduring psychological torment is perhaps the only genuine form of punishment that the universe has managed to inflict upon this unidentified suspect, thus far a silent, invisible prison constructed entirely out of his own arrogant, careless mistakes and the unyielding, fierce persistence of the Dedicated investigators who absolutely refuse to allow the memory of Gregory Yamada to simply quietly fade into the obscuring mists of Hawaiian history. The extraordinary dedication of the police department personnel who continue to actively champion this specific case after 35 long agonizing years is a profound testament to the absolute highest ideals of the law enforcement profession, demonstrating a deeply moving institutional refusal to accept defeat in the face of overwhelming logistical odds and a complete lack of fresh, actionable forensic evidence. These seasoned investigators recognize with absolute crystal clarity that behind the faded ink of the original police reports and the degraded quality of the security tape, there was a vibrant, living 21-year-old boy with a family who loved him, a future that was waiting to be written, and a fundamental inherent human right to exist that was violently, abruptly, permanently stolen from him for absolutely no justifiable reason. They carry the heavy emotional burden of this unresolved tragedy not merely as a professional obligation but as a deep moral imperative, understanding that allowing this specific killer to permanently successfully escape accountability would represent a devastating, unacceptable failure of the entire social contract, and a horrific, terrifying validation of the absolute worst, most predatory instincts of human nature. Therefore, they continue to relentlessly push the 1986 photograph out into the public sphere, endlessly, aggressively utilizing every available media platform to ask the exact same desperate, crucial questions, hoping against all reasonable statistical odds that the specific required individual will finally see the image, recognize the facial features, and possess the requisite moral courage to step forward and shatter the wall of silence that has protected a murderer for almost 40 years. We, as the listening public, share in this profound moral responsibility because the ultimate resolution of this cold case absolutely relies on the collective vigilance and the active, engaged participation of the broader community, who must continually refuse to look away from the painful, unresolved realities of the past and must actively, aggressively champion the cause of those who can no longer physically fight for their own justice. The tragedy of Gregory Yamada is ultimately not just a localized story about a brutal, unsolved murder on the island of Oahu, but rather a deeply universal cautionary tale about the terrifying fragility of life, the enduring, devastating impact of sudden extreme violence, and the absolute critical importance of maintaining hope in the face of seemingly insurmountable darkness, where the truth is deeply buried but absolutely not permanently destroyed. As we definitively close the final chapter on this exhaustive, comprehensive exploration of one of Hawaii's most notorious, enduring mysteries, we are left with a profound sense of solemn reverence for the young victim and a fierce, unyielding determination to see the scales of justice finally permanently balanced, regardless of how many decades it takes or how much agonizing effort is fundamentally required to reach that ultimate, highly anticipated resolution. The desolate shadows beneath the H-1 freeway may currently still hold the dark, violent secrets of exactly what transpired on that September evening, but the brilliant, unyielding light of truth has a remarkable, undeniable tendency to eventually violently, forcefully penetrate even the absolute deepest, most impenetrable darkness, fundamentally guaranteeing that the silent, unidentified ghost from 1986 cannot remain safely hidden forever. There will inevitably come a day when a name is finally, definitively, permanently attached to that grainy black and white photograph, when the agonizing 35-year wait is suddenly, abruptly, permanently concluded, and when the complete, unvarnished, terrifying truth of the Gregory Yamada homicide is finally violently dragged into the light, providing a long overdue measure of peace to a devastated family and proving to the entire world that a cold case is never truly closed as long as there are people who bravely, absolutely refuse to forget the victims of the past. The echoes of a stolen life continue to actively demand our absolute full attention, compelling us to keep searching, keep questioning, and keep fiercely, aggressively demanding accountability for a horrific crime that fundamentally forever changed the landscape of Hawaiian true crime history and left a permanent, enduring scar on the soul of the island. Time, the ultimate silent witness to all human atrocities, may have provided the killer with a lengthy temporary reprieve, but it is also the very mechanism that will eventually systematically, inevitably dismantle his protective walls, exposing his hidden crimes, and ensuring that the final definitive chapter of the Gregory Yamada story is ultimately authored by the unyielding hand of true, absolute justice. The concept of closure in a cold case is often a mythological construct created by a society that desperately craves narrative symmetry and moral equilibrium in a world that frequently offers neither of those comforting illusions to the victims of extreme violence or to the families they leave behind in the devastating wake of their sudden tragic absence from the physical plane. When we deeply examine the profound tragedy of Gregory M. Yamada and the permanent shadowy legacy he left behind in the industrial dirt beneath the towering concrete expanse of the Waikele overpass, we are forced to confront the deeply uncomfortable reality that some mysteries do not neatly resolve themselves within the confines of a standardized investigative timeline, but instead slowly transform into permanent cultural scars that define the dark historical underbelly of a specific geographic location, forever altering the way the local population interacts with their own surrounding environment. The island of Oahu, with its breathtaking postcard vistas and its globally celebrated reputation as an idyllic tropical sanctuary, continues to harbor this deeply unsettling secret beneath its beautiful surface, forcing a profound psychological duality upon the collective consciousness of the Hawaiian community, who must constantly navigate the stark, terrifying contrast between the natural stunning beauty of their island home and the horrific capacity for human brutality that was so vividly demonstrated on that fateful September evening in 1986. The sheer relentless passage of approximately 40 agonizing years has fundamentally altered the physical landscape of the crime scene itself, as the relentless march of commercial development and urban expansion has slowly encroached upon the once completely isolated stretch of Cane Hall Road, burying the original dirt and gravel beneath thick, heavy layers of modern asphalt and reinforced concrete. Yet the heavy, suffocating atmospheric weight of the unresolved trauma continues to violently resonate through that specific geographical coordinate, acting as a permanent, invisible monument to a young 21-year-old life that was ruthlessly extinguished for reasons that remain entirely, completely obscured by the devastating silence of the perpetrators. We must inevitably return to the single most frustrating and powerful piece of evidence in this entire multi-decade investigation, which is the grainy black and white automated teller machine surveillance photograph that captured the completely unidentified suspect casually utilizing the murdered boy's financial assets just mere hours after the lethal blunt force trauma was inflicted upon his fragile human body in the dark. This specific solitary image completely defies the standard conventions of forensic science because it is not a microscopic fragment of trace evidence or a complex biological anomaly, but rather a literal crystal clear documentation of a human face staring directly into the mechanical lens of an early security apparatus, completely unaware that his own arrogant, selfish desire for immediate financial gratification was actively, permanently sealing his ultimate historical legacy as the primary focal point of a massive, enduring homicide investigation. The profound, agonizing irony of this specific situation is that the killer, or the individual intimately connected to the immediate aftermath of the killing, voluntarily walked out of the impenetrable darkness of the desolate underpass, where he had successfully committed a seemingly perfect, untraceable crime, and deliberately placed himself in the harsh, unblinking fluorescent light of the Waianae Bank branch, effectively handing the Honolulu Police Department the absolute most critical, vital investigative key they could ever possibly hope to acquire in a cold case scenario. Yet this monumental strategic blunder by the suspect has thus far completely failed to yield the ultimate desired result of a formal legal prosecution, because the law enforcement authorities remain hopelessly trapped in a deeply frustrating technological paradox where they possess a perfect visual representation of the suspect, but completely lack the specific digital infrastructure or the cooperative human intelligence necessary to forcibly extract his actual legal identity from the silent, two-dimensional historical artifact that has haunted their filing cabinets for decades. The profound psychological burden of carrying this specific unsolved mystery heavily weighs upon the dedicated detectives of the Cold Case Unit, who must routinely systematically revisit the exact same tragic details, the exact same autopsy reports, and the exact same static surveillance photograph. Year after year, constantly, desperately hoping that a fresh perspective or a subtle shift in the cultural landscape might finally, suddenly generate the elusive, miraculous breakthrough they have been relentlessly seeking for their entire professional careers in law enforcement. These seasoned investigators fundamentally understand that they are not merely shuffling dusty bureaucratic paperwork, but are actively, fiercely fighting for the inherent human dignity of a young man who is treated as completely disposable refuse by the violent individuals who callously, carelessly discarded his broken body in the shadows without a single fleeting thought for the massive, cascading generational trauma they were unleashing upon his loved ones and the broader island community who still mourn his devastating passing. The enduring, terrifying reality of the Gregory Yamato investigation is that the specific individual captured on the 1986 bank tape might still be actively walking among the unsuspecting public today, completely successfully hiding behind a meticulously constructed facade of mundane, ordinary normality, while secretly harboring the absolute darkest, most corrosive knowledge imaginable deep within the hidden recesses of his own personal psychology. If he has indeed managed to physically survive the subsequent decades of complete unearned freedom, he has been forced to endure a completely unique invisible form of psychological imprisonment where he can never truly completely relax or feel entirely safe because he is fundamentally aware that his own face continues to actively circulate through modern digital networks permanently hunted by an invisible global dragnet of amateur sleuths and dedicated law enforcement professionals who absolutely refuse to abandon the relentless pursuit of absolute justice for the slain victim. Every single time the anniversary of the brutal murder approaches and the local Hawaiian news media bravely, responsibly rebroadcasts that specific haunting image, the suspect must inevitably experience a sudden, terrifying spike of absolute visceral panic, recognizing that the protective walls of silence he has so carefully maintained for 40 years could instantly, completely collapse due to a single random, casual recognition by a former acquaintance, a distant family member, or an estranged romantic partner who suddenly, finally connects the historical photograph to the living, breathing man they know in the present day. This constant, suffocating, underlying paranoia is the silent, devastating tax he must continually pay for his horrific actions, forming a psychological prison built entirely out of his own arrogant, careless mistakes and the unyielding, fierce persistence of the determined detectives who absolutely refuse to let the murdered victims simply fade away into the obscuring mists of forgotten local history without a proper legal resolution. We, as the compassionate, engaged public, possess a profound, deeply ingrained moral obligation to actively, aggressively assist in the ultimate resolution of this tragic narrative by completely, absolutely refusing to look away from the uncomfortable, unresolved realities of the past, and by continually actively sharing the suspect's photograph across all available modern communication platforms to ensure that the killer can absolutely never, ever find a permanent safe haven in the shadows of public apathy. The ultimate definitive resolution of the Gregory Yamato homicide relies entirely, completely upon the unpredictable, fragile catalyst of human conscience, requiring a single specific individual somewhere in the vast, sprawling anonymity of the modern world to finally, suddenly summon the immense requisite moral courage to step forward and forcefully shatter the impenetrable wall of silence that has protected a ruthless, violent killer for far too many agonizing decades of unearned peace. We must collectively, continuously, aggressively demand complete, absolute accountability for the horrific, brutal violence that permanently, abruptly ended the vibrant, promising life of a 21-year-old boy, recognizing that true, absolute justice is not a passive, natural phenomenon that simply inevitably occurs on its own, but rather a fierce, proactive, ongoing struggle that requires the constant, dedicated vigilance of an entire unified society deeply committed to protecting the absolute fundamental sanctity of all human life, regardless of the passage of time. The desolate, heavy shadows beneath the towering, imposing concrete infrastructure of the H1 freeway will forever permanently carry the heavy, sorrowful emotional resonance of his unfulfilled stolen potential, silently, constantly demanding that we never, ever, ever avert our collective eyes from the grainy black and white image that alone holds the ultimate master key to permanently unraveling this entire agonizing, complex, deeply unsettling true crime mystery that continues to haunt the beautiful tropical island. Time, the ultimate silent objective witness to all human atrocities, may have provided the killer with a lengthy temporary reprieve from the absolute severe consequences of his actions, but it is also the exact very mechanism that will eventually systematically, inevitably dismantle his protective walls, completely permanently exposing his hidden crimes to the harsh, unyielding light of rigorous public judicial scrutiny and ensuring that he finally answers for the blood spilled on that dark September night. The remarkable enduring fact that the unknown suspect's face has now miraculously survived multiple massive technological eras, successfully completely transitioning from a fragile, degrading physical analog security tape to a permanent, indestructible digital file distributed across the vast global internet, ironically guarantees that his brief moment of arrogant brazen exposure in YNI has achieved a terrifying, inescapable immortality, permanently locking him in a constant state of continuous invisible digital pursuit where he can absolutely never truly rest in peace, knowing that the entire world is constantly actively looking for his specific facial features. There will inevitably come a day when a specific legal name is finally definitively permanently attached to that haunting, grainy photograph, when the agonizing 40-year wait is suddenly, abruptly, permanently concluded, and when the complete, unvarnished, terrifying truth of the Gregory Yamada homicide is finally violently dragged into the light, providing a long overdue massive measure of peace to a devastated community and proving to the entire watching world that a cold case is truly never ever closed as long as there are dedicated people who bravely absolutely refuse to forget the stolen victims of the past. The echoes of his stolen life continue to actively, loudly demand our absolute, full, unwavering attention, compelling us to keep searching, keep questioning, and keep fiercely, aggressively demanding accountability for a horrific crime that fundamentally forever changed the landscape of Hawaiian true crime history and left a permanent, enduring scar on the very soul of the tropical island that cannot simply be erased by the passage of time or the pouring of new concrete over the old dirt roads. We must deeply recognize that the story of Gregory Yamada is fundamentally, emphatically, not a closed, sealed book, but merely a temporarily paused, agonizing chapter, anxiously, desperately waiting for a single courageous human voice to finally provide the missing crucial name and right. The concluding definitive sentence of absolute legal accountability, so that the young man who died in the dark can finally, completely rest in the brilliant light of truth forevermore. As we firmly anchor ourselves in the present reality of the year 2026, marking exactly 4 agonizingly long decades since the brutally battered body of 21-year-old Gregory M. Yamada was initially discovered abandoned in the unforgiving industrial dirt of Cane Hall Road, we are profoundly forced to confront the terrifying existential weight of a cold case that has stubbornly, completely refused to yield to the relentless forward march of time, fundamentally defying the natural human expectation of narrative closure and ultimate judicial accountability in a world that desperately craves moral equilibrium following acts of extreme, inexplicable violence. The sheer passage of 40 years represents a massive generational shift, where the original dedicated detectives who meticulously processed the harrowing physical crime scene beneath the towering concrete shadows of the H1 freeway and the Waikele overpass have likely long since retired completely, handing over their meticulously compiled dusty case files to a completely new generation of modern law enforcement professionals who must now attempt to solve a mid-20th century analog homicide utilizing 21st century digital methodologies. This profound passing of the investigative torch highlights the devastating, agonizing reality that an entire lifetime has essentially transpired since Gregory was violently, prematurely erased from the physical world, meaning that the young man who died in the dark has now been officially dead for almost twice as long as he was ever actually permitted to be alive, experiencing the vibrant tropical beauty of the Hawaiian island of Oahu. We must deeply, relentlessly consider the profound psychological toll this permanent, agonizing absence has inflicted upon the victims' surviving family members and the broader local community, who have been forcefully subjected to a completely unique, incredibly cruel form of emotional purgatory where they are perpetually denied the fundamental human right to know exactly why their loved one was brutally taken from them and precisely whose violent hands were ultimately responsible for inflicting the catastrophic lethal blunt force trauma before callously, carelessly discarding his broken physical vessel over the concrete safety barrier of the elevated highway. The absolute horrifying darkness of the crime itself is permanently, forever contrasted against the specific agonizing timeline of events that immediately followed the murder, specifically focusing our collective attention back onto the single most incredibly frustrating piece of physical evidence in the entire historical archive of the Honolulu Police Department, which is the grainy black and white surveillance photograph captured at approximately 6 o'clock in the evening on September the 8th, 1986, at the Honolulu Federal Savings and Loan Branch in the coastal community of Waianae. As the year 2026 continues to unfold, that specific solitary photographic image of the unidentified man casually brazenly utilizing the deceased victim's personal automated teller machine card has fundamentally transcended its original status as a mere piece of preliminary police evidence, entirely transforming into a deeply haunting permanent cultural artifact that eternally symbolizes the terrifying, devastating limitations of human justice when confronted by the absolute silence of the perpetrators and the protective, obscuring shadows of the past. The profound, agonizing irony of possessing a literal crystal-clear visual representation of a suspect's face, while simultaneously remaining completely fundamentally powerless to actually legally identify that specific individual, creates a deeply frustrating, massive psychological burden for the cold case investigators who must endlessly, constantly stare at the static, frozen image of a man who intimately knows the darkest, violent secrets of what truly transpired on that fateful Monday evening, but who remains entirely, completely unreachable, protected by an impenetrable, invisible wall of absolute anonymity. We must critically, aggressively analyze the terrifying prospect that if this unidentified suspect is indeed the primary architect of the lethal violence, and if he has somehow managed to physically survive the subsequent 40 years of unearned complete freedom he is currently navigating the final stages of his own natural life, walking the modern streets as a senior citizen whose current physical appearance is likely completely, drastically altered from the youthful, confident figure captured on the bank security tape 4 decades ago. This inevitable, devastating biological reality of human aging significantly, exponentially complicates the already monumental modern investigative effort, because the police are now essentially desperately hunting for a phantom whose current physical face may absolutely no longer resemble the historical photograph, meaning that even if the original image is continuously, widely, aggressively circulated across vast modern global digital networks, the statistical probability of a sudden successful organic identification rapidly diminishes with every single passing day. However, despite these overwhelmingly, seemingly insurmountable logistical and temporal odds, the law enforcement authorities in the state of Hawaii absolutely, fiercely refuse to completely, officially close the investigative book, firmly relying on the strict foundational legal principle that the ultimate horrific crime of homicide carries absolutely no statute of limitations whatsoever, fundamentally ensuring that the heavy door to future criminal prosecution remains permanently wide open, waiting for the specific critical moment when the fragile, shifting loyalties of human relationships, or the sudden, overwhelming, crushing weight of a guilty conscience finally compels someone to step forward out of the shadows. The continuous, enduring public existence of a 1986 photograph effectively serves as a permanent, invisible digital prison for the unidentified suspect, ensuring that regardless of where he currently resides or how deeply he believes he has successfully, permanently buried his violent Past, he can absolutely never truly completely relax because he must live every single day with a constant suffocating underlying terrifying paranoia that a completely random casual encounter or a sudden unexpected technological breakthrough might instantly violently unravel his carefully meticulously constructed false reality, exposing his true monstrous nature to the unforgiving scrutiny of the entire world. The geographical contrast between the desolate, isolated original crime scene near the Waikele overpass and the bustling coastal town of Waianae, where the stolen bank card was actively utilized, continues to heavily underscore the deeply calculated, cold-blooded nature of the post-murder actions, suggesting a perpetrator who possessed a chilling, terrifying degree of operational awareness and who deliberately consciously chose to physically separate himself from the immediate visceral horror of the battered body before calmly, casually engaging in a purely selfish, financially motivated transaction. This staggering, completely unmitigated audacity demonstrates a profound, total devaluation of human life, completely reducing the tragic, violent death of a 21-year-old boy to a mere inconvenient stepping stone on the path toward immediate selfish, financial gratification, fundamentally painting a psychological portrait of a highly predatory, completely remorseless individual who represents a permanent, enduring threat to the safety and the moral fabric of any civilized society. As we collectively actively bear witness to the somber 40-year anniversary of this devastating, completely unsolved tragedy, we are deeply morally obligated to completely fundamentally reject the comforting passive illusion that time automatically naturally heals all wounds or that forgotten crimes simply quietly fade away into the historical ether without causing massive permanent psychological damage to the surrounding environment, because the heavy suffocating silence emanating from Kane Hall Road continues to actively loudly demand absolute true justice. The tragic story of Gregory Yamada is definitively, emphatically not an isolated historical anomaly, but rather a deeply universally resonant, terrifying reminder of the absolute profound fragility of human existence, completely highlighting the terrifying ease with which a vibrant, promising young life can be violently, abruptly, completely erased from the physical plane, while the responsible individuals seamlessly, smoothly vanish back into the ordinary, mundane background of everyday society, leaving behind nothing but a shattered, grieving family and a deeply frustrated, bewildered police department. We must continually, relentlessly, actively choose to champion the memory of the young victim, absolutely refusing to allow his stolen future to be entirely, completely defined by the brutal, violent mechanics of his tragic death, choosing instead to focus our collective unified energy on the relentless, fierce pursuit of the absolute, unvarnished truth, continuously, constantly, aggressively demanding that the specific human name attached to the face in the photograph is finally, violently, forcefully dragged out of the obscuring shadows and exposed to the harsh, brilliant, unyielding light of a formal judicial courtroom. The absolute true legacy of the Gregory Yamada cold case in the modern context of 2026 must heavily, firmly rest upon the fundamental, unwavering conviction that regardless of the massive, agonizing accumulation of decades, true final justice is an absolute, enduring, fundamental human necessity that can never ever be completely abandoned or permanently compromised by the sheer difficulty of the investigative process. The silent, unresolved ghosts of the Hawaiian Highway absolutely rely upon our collective, engaged modern memory to keep their specific tragic narratives vibrantly alive, constantly serving as a permanent, fierce testament to the enduring power of hope and the relentless, unyielding human desire for ultimate moral accountability in a deeply complex, frequently violent world that so desperately needs to see the delicate scales of justice finally, completely, permanently balanced in favor of the innocent fallen victims who can no longer physically speak for themselves.